Welcome back to the Zapata Baron Podcast Boxing Edition, brought to you by Georgie's Bagels. Georgie Bagels, our bagels will knock you out. Well, my next guest is an award-winning broadcast journalist, and he's a staple ringside for all the major fights. He is not only in the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, but the International Boxing Hall of Fame class of 2012. And on March 1st, he will kick off his 45th year ringside calling the fights. It is an honor to have International Boxing Hall of Famer and overall one of the good guys in boxing, Al Bernstein, to join my show. Al, how are you?
I'm good. Very nice to be with you. This is fun.
Yeah, Al, you know, one of my fondest memories of you, and I wanted to get this out of the way quick as a kid, was the Top Rank fights on ESPN. And if you would have told me 3 decades removed to that, I would be talking to you with this new form of communication. I'd say you were crazy, but here you are, and it is actually a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, that was thank you. I appreciate it. That was that series was unique. You know, I don't know if anyone at the time, as when you and I were talking off air, at the time there were these 2 series going on at the same time, the USA Tuesday Night Fights, USA Network. And that was almost every week. And ours was pretty much every week. And those 2 undertakings had never been really so much tried before, although there were the Friday night fights for a long time. And since then, I don't know if anybody's had that consistent, a show of boxing. What the Top Rank people did on that series was pretty amazing. And it was the beginning for me of my broadcasting career. And those 15 or 16 years of doing that series were fascinating times on every level, because the series itself was fun to do. The boxing was fun. You know, we didn't have the kind of heavyweight or kind of championship or major contenders always, but we always had really good boxing. And I always say it was great AAA boxing with an occasional major league fight put into it. And so the fights were great. We would go to all these crazy locations around the United States. And it was the 80s. So we had a good time doing it. and we had fun. And it was an amazing series. And more importantly, the point you made, that it's a memory for you. And when I go around the country doing personal appearances or broadcasting, and I talk to people, so many times they bring that up, that it was a staple for them, either as a young person watching, or sometimes I get it from people they point out that they watched it with their dad, which was a great experience. So it's a pretty cool time.
But you say it was like the AAA, but the thing I loved about it was you would get the Bismarck, North Dakotas with the Virgil Hills. You'd get the Davenport, Iowas with the Michael Nunns. And it was that is what's missing now in boxing. To be honest with you, you don't have the buildup for the fighters to now move to the next step. And obviously, we don't have Showtime, HBO anymore. As we move into more of the Saudi big money cards now, which leads me into this Saturday, February 22nd, a big probably. I would say the biggest card we're going to see for a while. And I'm saying that because there's only they can never put a card like this on in the United States. Never. You'd be broke. You'd be broke. But they have now the opportunity to put this card on top to bottom. This is a stacked show. So, and I don't even know where to start but which fight would intrigue you the most on this show? Now, obviously one fight is out, Schofield and Shakur Stevenson's out, which was the fight that intrigued me the most, honestly. But which one intrigues you the most on this show?
Well, you could pick one of a number. Obviously, the main event with Beterbiev and Bivol, the rematch of what was a very good first fight between them. And this is a significant fight historically. That, of course, is amazing. But then as you move down the card, Deontay Dubois and Joseph Parker. Fascinating fight. Dubois, the youngest of he has a version of the heavyweight title, even though people universally accept Alexander Usyk as the true champion. But Dubois is fighting for the right to fight Usyk, who wants to unify titles, fighting against Joseph Parker, a former champion, who has had a remarkable run of excellent fights. And while it seems like Joseph Parker has been around forever, he's still in his early 30s. He's not, by heavyweight standards, old. And that fight, I think, is just a fascinating fight. Parker's very much a live underdog in it. Hamza Shiraz against Carlos Adames is another fight on that card that is fascinating. You know, the middleweight division has been slow in the last couple of years. It hasn't provided us with as many really great matches as we would have wanted. Well, this one is a really good one. And Shiraz has shown that he is a tall, lanky, difficult man to deal with in the ring, exciting fighter to watch. Carlos Adames at his best, when he's fighting at his best, is a force to be reckoned with. But in fights, and I did his fight with Derevyanchenko, I did his fight with J. Rock Williams, when he faces the good opposition, which of course Shiraz is, he has always been tested and tested considerably. So this is hardly a one-sided fight either way, and I think it's going to be a great fight. And then the Madrimov Ortiz fight is a fascinating one. And I think of all the fights on the card, maybe that's the one where you even have the most split in terms of who's predicting what will happen.
Yeah, that one should be action-packed. As long as it lasts. I don't know. Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Madrimov might be the favorite in this. Only because I think
by a little bit,
only because Ortiz maybe have a chin issue. Not sure so much yet at this one, but that one I look forward to. But overall, a fantastic card. But these are the kind of fights that you can't get here. You have to go overseas to get these fights. How up are you on the Saudi arrangement here? Whereas I don't know how long this is going to last. Like, you look at the golf, they took the golf away, and that's kind of like slowing down now. Now they've moved on to boxing. Is this a come get it while you can kind of situation, or do you see this being long term?
That's a very good question. It's the ultimate. It's a $64,000 question. Their commitment has been astonishing, and it's really on two levels, because it's the Riyadh season. I had Frank Warren on my YouTube show, which I do on the Salida Promotions channel, and he did a very good job of explaining why all this money can be spent. Riyadh season isn't exactly a promoter; it's a organization to promote the idea of people visiting Saudi Arabia and all the rest of it. So that's part of the reason why the level of funding is so amazing. But then Turki Al-Sheikh, who bought Ring Magazine and who on his own as a separate entity is involved in boxing, he fuels it. And even Ring Magazine is going to have 3 boxing matches coming up, or cards that are kind of under their auspices. So it's a multi-tiered thing. The boxing has some issues. They have issues in terms of platforms in America, not so much worldwide, but in America. But the interest from Saudi Arabia and the idea that a card like this can happen and people only have to pay $29, $26 for it is pretty remarkable. Now, it doesn't mean that boxing stops in the United States. It doesn't even mean that the boxing that is done under the auspices of the Riyadh season or Al Sheikh are only going to be in Saudi Arabia, because they're not. There are a number of them already scheduled. And then there's Matchroom Boxing and Frank Warren's Queensberry that's coming here to America. Top Rank, even if ESPN gets out of boxing, which it looks like they're either going to get out or diminish what they do. And then you have the PBC with its right now tentative connection to Amazon Prime. They're doing a lot of pay-per-views with them, but the shows that they were going to do that were going to be on Amazon Prime regularly have not materialized yet. And so how long the Saudi influence continues is something we can't answer. But while it is there, if the sport uses it wisely and uses it to continue to fuel interest in the sport and create excitement, then if it should go away, maybe it will have served its purpose.
Well, I certainly hope so, that it kind of jumpstarts what's going on here in the United States. The only issue I have with the Saudi cards, they're incredibly long with a lot of filler. And I think that could turn off a lot of people in our culture on this side. I mean, I know they want to have it as an event, their Riyadh season. but man, those 11 o'clock in the morning shows.
Well,
Like,
now, and a lot of times, yeah, they go early, but in most of those cases, watching the deep undercard might not be something you kind of feel like you have to do. This is a card, though,
oh God,
where you want to. And
yeah.
and here's the other thing about it. I mean, you don't have to watch. You can watch it whenever you want. If you buy it for $26, right, you can watch it. You can. I sent out a post on Twitter saying how many of you are watching the full thing all the way through, and how many of you are, are doing it in pieces. One guy wrote back, my wife's given me permission to watch the whole card.
Wow.
On a Saturday, which will take a whole day.
I will.
But I think the quality of the fights is obviously pretty extraordinary. And, but when you compare this card to some of the great Don King cards and even some of the ones that Top Rank had back in the day, King was known more for stacking his cards like these. I can only find one card of King's that I think comes close to measuring up to this one. So we'll see. Now we have to wait to see the fights, but on paper, it certainly looks pretty extraordinary.
It definitely does. But let's turn our attention to where you'll be calling the fights on March 1st on DAZN. You'll be ringside for the Subriel Matias versus Gabe Valenzuela card in Puerto Rico. And that's a nice trip for you too. Going down to Puerto Rico, be ringside for that. I don't see that. I don't call that working. I call that having a little bit of fun time. I'll tell you that. Last time Matias went out, he was a 7-1 favorite against Liam Parra, and it didn't pan out the way he wanted to. Him being the boogeyman of the division all of a sudden turned it on its head. This is, I think, a must-win for Matias. Do you agree with me here?
Yeah, he came back with one win since then against Ramirez, who's a decent fighter, but not a upper echelon fighter. And the Parra fight was, obviously an off night for him. He didn't look like the. I mean, I'd done all his fights leading up to that for 3.5, 4 year period. He was in all those exciting wars where he would absorb a ton of punches in the first few rounds, come back, and then destroy his opponent against very good competition, ultimately winning the world title. He's in his early 30s, and yes, this fight with Valenzuela, which is a title eliminator for the winner to fight Richardson-Hitchens.
Right.
And so there's lots of importance attached to it. And the interesting thing is, this fight put on by Salida Promotions, which is one of the and you talked about the grassroots boxing that is needed. Well, DAZN actually has about 4 or 5 promoters like the Salida Promotions, which I do all their fights in their big time Boxing USA series, that do the kind of fights that are, for as fighters are moving forward and everything. But the guy that he's fighting, Gabe Valenzuela, is a very good fighter. That division, 140, to me, is the deepest division in boxing. There are more good fighters at 140 than any other division, and I don't even think it's close. And a guy like Valenzuela is a perfect example. He's not a household name, but he's really good, and he's aggressive, and he comes to fight, and he wants to go after you. Well, with Matias, that is the recipe for excitement. I mean, I do not see that fight going the distance. It's very hard to think of it going the distance. Although, Matias did with Parra one of only 2 fights in which he's gone the distance in his whole pro career. But this one is going to be a slugfest for sure. And I think it's going to be very interesting. And yes, there is pressure on Subriel Matias, who did in fact look like he was the best of the 140 pounders, or the most dangerous for sure. And that performance against Parra, who then subsequently lost his title in an upset. But see, I think that's the 140 pound division. I think that defines it. And, I think I wrote in my column in Ring Magazine with predictions of the year. I said the 140 pound division is going to continue to produce great fights, with champions changing at an alarming rate. And that, I think we have to get used to that in the 140 pound division. The guy that's champion now might not be there 3 months ago, because there's so many people that are coming after him.
Yeah, but that's not a bad thing for boxing. That's not a
It's
bad
not.
thing
It
because
isn't.
it shows competition. It's almost like the blueprint for what the NFL has. They want everybody to
Absolutely.
be competitive, and if it's a
Absolutely.
blow, if I go into the arena knowing that Matias is going to knock out Valenzuela, why bother? This is
Yeah.
not.
Why
This is
go? I
Yeah.
agree.
Why go? Why
Yeah.
go?
And I say this about that fight because I've watched a lot of video of both men, and uh, and often I'll never forget when oh God, I'm thinking that Garcia, who won the title from, or didn't win the title, but yeah, he did win the title, and I think 126. He ended up fighting Tank Davis, and I can't remember who he beat for the title, but the Dominican fighter,
Okay.
and he was fighting in a fight that he was virtually unknown, and even my broadcast mates, Morrow and Abner Mares, were very skeptical of him. Well, I watched a lot of video of him, and I said to them, not that I'm some brilliant prognosticator, I said to them, no, this guy's good. He belongs here. He's going to be a tough out. And he ended up winning against I can't remember the fighter, but it was a well-known fighter who everybody thought was going to win the fight. So Valenzuela to me is that kind of guy. You know, he's one of those people that, you know, he's fought good competition. He's been just this close, you know, and those are the kind of fights you want. And in a 140-pound division, you get them all the time. I mean, literally every month or two, we see a fight in a 140-pound division that is just a barn burner.
Yeah, and the reason why I suggested it be a must-win for Matias, because of his reputation of being the boogeyman. He was the one. He was lined up for Devin Haney, Ryan Garcia. There were so many fights for him to Teofimo Lopez.
Absolutely.
And then once he lost, it seemed like it took a little bit of steam off that fastball for him. Now he has to build himself back. He got a nice win, but if he loses here, oh boy, we're starting to go backwards a little bit again.
Well, and again, the problem is, if you're in some other division, maybe it's not so devastating to you. But in this one, with hordes of fighters, you know, coming after this and being in positions to challenge, if he were to have 2 wins out of his losses out of his last 3 fights, that's going to be very devastating to him.
Yeah.
So a lot is on the line. Here's where he does get an advantage. While Valenzuela is a really good fighter, he's the kind of fighter that Matias wants to fight. Now, I thought Liam Paro, who's a good fighter, would not be quite as clever against Matias as he was. And also, Matias, the way Matias attacked him there was something off for him that night. But in Valenzuela, even though he gets a very good fighter, it's somebody that stylistically will I think make a fight that will kind of benefit Matias. And at his best, who is more exciting to watch than Subriel Matias? I just find his fights with Ergashev and Ponce and several of the other ones that he had were just wildly exciting.
Now, I'm a Puerto Rican descent, and he, you know, they were building him up to be one of the ones. Yeah. He was kind of on the back burner. Yes. He's not Xander Zayas. I think he is the next Miguel Cotto type. Felix Trinidad. Well, Trinidad's a different ball game. I mean, yeah. he was our most loved Puerto Rican fighter, you know, that I can remember in our time.
Yeah.
But I think with a fight like this in his hometown, if he makes a nice showing, it catapults him right back up there into being the guy who's going to be in line for a nice, good fight.
Well, yeah, and because it's a title eliminator, it is very likely, they don't always work out where you get the title shot, but he'll have Richardson Hitchens. And make no mistake, that's a winnable fight for him. Richardson is a good fighter, but that's a winnable fight for Subriel Matias if he still has the same capabilities he did a year and a half ago. And he's 32. I mean, it's not like he's 38 or something like that. So yeah, there's his potentially good days could very well still be ahead of him. And that is a fight that I think would be fun to see, because Hitchens is a boxer puncher who against true power punching aggressors doesn't always do as well as we would think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. And so that makes it, I think, a really, really intriguing fight.
But as you will know, as I do too, you never know with the sanctioning bodies if the fight does happen.
Just because it's a title eliminator. Now, this one, the way it's kind of lining up, could well be, end the way it's anticipated. But you're right. You never know if people have fought many title eliminators and not gotten a shot at the world title. That's for sure.
Well, Al, 45 years.
Yeah.
I don't want to go. I want to wrap up with this because I really.
Luckily, I started when I was 10. Right.
Well, it's funny when I read that email. I said 45 years. I'm starting to calculate. My geez. Hey, I will tell you this though. You still look good. So all those years you haven't aged a bit. So you still look good.
You're very kind.
But 44 years, top rank, ESPN. That's where I kind of. That's where I think the meat of it was that I first started knowing. Now, I didn't realize that you did Major League Baseball at the NBA and all. You covered a lot of a broad spectrum there.
I did. I moved to Showtime in 2004, but and spent 20 years there. But the last 4 years at Showtime, I wasn't on their weekly boxing series, which was interesting. That's a whole nother story, but we won't go into that. So that's the period where I covered all those other sports and did a lot of other things. And it actually was a fun period for me broadcasting wise.
Now, did you like the transition a little bit, or was it kind of just like, did you feel out of your element?
Well, originally it didn't feel good because it was a forced switch. But then it did feel good because I was still doing some boxing, covering for SportsCenter and doing shows on the Classic Sports Network about boxing, which at that time they had. So I still had my hand in boxing, but I wasn't sitting ringside doing fights. And that was unique for me, very different. But that period, I did embrace it. I did enjoy it. But right up by the time when I left the top rank or the weekly boxing series, I had a couple years left on my contract, finished it out. I really thought I would be leaving ESPN at that time. They re-signed me to do all this other stuff. And I said, okay, because at that moment, it seemed like a good idea. And I spent a couple more years doing that. And it was really fun to cover all those sports. And I had a daily radio show during part of that period about all sports. So it was fun to do that as well. And I always wanted to. I just got so pigeonholed into boxing because that was what I did. So it was a fun period for me.
Okay, but either way, it's still boxing solidified you in so many hearts of everyone who was in the boxing game at that time. I still revel the 90s as one of the golden eras of boxing. Definitely the heavyweight division for me. But what is one of your best? Now today, believe it or not, is the anniversary of Eric Morales versus Marco Antonio Barrera. Today, exactly.
Maybe the greatest trilogy of all time in boxing. One of the top 2 or 3.
Probably, yes, definitely top 3. Yeah. Was there ever something? And I'm going to try to see if you recall this one. I'm going to give you one of my memories of that before I let you go. What was your favorite fighter and fight? I mean, because you were saying like it's like AAA kind of, but someone that you saw growing up through the top rank system, and all of a sudden he shot up there and he was there. Was there a favorite fighter of yours that you saw say, hey, I want this guy to succeed, and he did?
Well, let me start with what's my favorite fight to announce of all time, and that was on Showtime, the Diego Corrales, Jose Luis Castillo fight, which is the best fight. I even though it's hard to quantify, but that was the best fight in terms of skill set, excitement, and what was at stake. And then number 2, believe it or not, is Hagler Hearns, only because there were 9.5 rounds of Castillo Corrales, and were only 3.5 rounds of 3 rounds of Hearns and Hagler. During that Top Rank series, there were so many there were a lot of, like you brought up Zach Padilla, who was a fighter who was in all kinds of wars. Every time he fought, he would throw 1,000 punches in a 10-round fight, and the other guy would throw 1,000 punches. We had guys like Terrence Ali, who was on regularly, and
Kevin Pompey.
Kevin Pompey, who was there. Freddie Roach fought a lot.
Freddie Roach, yeah.
His fight with Tommy Cordova is a classic. And we had Harold Brazier, who was a great fighter. I'm writing a column for Ring Magazine for my next one about fighters who were really good fighters but never won a world title. He would be a perfect example of that. He had one shot against Juan Koji. He was a car salesman from South Bend, Indiana, who never gave up his job, but fought his way to the top of the 140-pound division and had a chance. We had characters like Buck Smith, the guy who,
oh my gosh,
had a zillion fights, was not a bad fighter.
No.
And was this close to being a true contender. But he would come on the show and be wildly entertaining. There's an interview on YouTube that's a classic of me interviewing him after a fight. And in the middle of the interview, he says, "Al, I'm kind of mad at you, though." And I said, "Oh, why are you mad at me, Buck?" He said, "Because we played wiffle ball today and you struck me out 3 times." And it was true. We played wiffle ball. The day of his fight, he was playing wiffle ball with us at outside somewhere. So that to me, that experience in that interview kind of defines that series, and it tells you what an interesting time it was.
It was just an absolutely great series. There was one time that I watched that I really, where you kind of cemented into me that Al Bernstein knows what he's talking about. And I don't know if you'll remember it because I don't know the names, but it just stuck out in my head.
Maybe I'll remember.
Okay. There was 2 fighters that were fighting. It was a very close fight. And I just remember you saying, if he just steps to his left and crank that left hook, and as the rounds were going back, it kept going, 4th round, 5th round, 6th round, and he knocked him out with a left hook.
Oh.
Do you remember at all what fight that was?
I can't remember which one it was.
It was constant.
A big thought about it. I want to say, I can't remember who was involved in that, and I don't do that. It's funny you're saying that because I don't do it in every fight, or I don't do it all the time, because I think, there's this idea that you have to be this sage and say that all the time. But when it's there and it's really important, I think it's worth saying. And that was one of those fights where it was worth mentioning it. And, when it happens, then it's great because you've given foreshadowing to the audience, and there it is. Oh, the other fight, one of the great moments on the Top Rank Boxing Series was when Johnny Tapia won his world title against, I believe, Henry Martinez in the pit in Albuquerque. It was coming back from, he had been away from the sports for about 3 years, alcohol, drug problems, living on the street, almost died, came back, and astonishingly was a better fighter when he came back than even his time before. And when he won that title, and it's the one call believe it or not, it's the one call I'm proudest of. I did play-by-play on that. Dave Bontempo was doing color, and he knocked out Martinez, or the fight was stopped after Martinez couldn't get up, and the crowd's going crazy. And all I said was, "And Johnny Tapia is all the way back." And then we shut up for the next minute and a half. And Dave and I both looked at each other and we went like that. And the crowd carried it. And that's all you needed to do. And I had chills at that moment. Mm-hmm. And that night was one of the most remarkable that I can remember on that series.
And it was the unique fighters like that. Johnny Tapia, probably one of the nicest guys in the ring, as opposed to outside the ring. It was a very strange dynamic he had. He was always,
even outside the ring, most of the damage he did was to himself. Yeah. To others, he was a good guy. He, but unfortunately, he had demons that he couldn't beat, which is a shame.
Yeah, and unfortunately, but. As we wrap up now, Al, I wanted to say personally, thank you so much for coming on. You are a tremendous inspiration in my childhood, your voice. And again, like I told you before we got on, when I told my friend James Achek and my brother that I was having Al Bernstein on, they couldn't believe it. You are an absolute legend, and I appreciate your time for giving us this time.
Yeah, it's very fun to visit with you, and it's fun to reminisce sometimes about things in the past. It's funny. I'm not. I don't imbue a lot of the commentary, and even when I do things like the YouTube show and whatever, a lot of times they skew more to the present and what's going on, and I don't always do a lot of reminiscing. So sometimes when you get a chance to do it and you get to look back at things, it's a lot of fun. So it was fun to visit with you, and we could do it again sometime.
Yeah, well, Al, where can they find you on social media?
Well, I'm on Twitter or X at Al Bernstein. I have my Salida Promotions YouTube show, which they can go to the Salida Promotions YouTube channel, and I have all kinds of great guests. We have just did a show with Jimmy Lennon Jr. I have a show coming up this week with Frank Warren, the fine promoter in from England, who with Queensbury Promotions, they've just signed on with DAZN, and he's going to be doing increasingly more fights in the U.S. and elsewhere. And Frank, of course, is interestingly, Frank has been promoting for 45 years. When I had him on, I said, well, we're the same, it's the same time period. And he was laughing. He said, yeah. He said, we somehow we're still here. But so that show is on there, and that's a lot of fun. And then people can check out my column on Ring Magazine, and they can see me on the Salida Promotions Big Fights or Big Time Boxing USA series on DAZN. I do those pretty much once a month. So a lot of places where people can catch up with me.
Well, as usual, Al, it's a pleasure again. And March 1st on DAZN, Al, you'll be ringside marking your 45th year, kicking it off. Hopefully you get another 45 in the game of boxing. But you are one of the good guys, like I said at the top of the show. Al Bernstein, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the Zapata Brand podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and listen where all podcasts are available.